People generally know soon enough when they are dehydrated, in need of food, or exposed to some kind of noxious stimulus. They start experiencing unpleasant subjective feelings such as thirst, hunger, and pain, which goad them into taking appropriate corrective action. Messages of this kind have also evolved to notify us when we are separated from and in need of close, affectionate contact with others. These messages are often collectively referred to as loneliness. Loneliness is something that nearly everyone experiences at some stage during their lives, and it can be caused by almost any event involving a change in the quality or number of one's social relationships. The death of a close friend or relative, or a divorce or separation, are extreme examples, although even relatively minor upheavals can also create profound distress. Moving to a new neighborhood, a new school, or a new job, even a change in status, such as a promotion at work, can result in moderate to severe bouts of loneliness. People vary markedly in how susceptible they are to the feelings of isolation associated with loneliness. When human subjects have been isolated in featureless rooms as part of psychological experiments, some have managed to remain for periods of up to 8 days without feeling anything more than slight nervousness or unease. Others have been ready to batter the door down within a few hours. Loneliness must also be clearly distinguished from the state of being alone. The latter may be actively sought out and enjoyed. The former is always a negative concept. Hence, it is possible for a person to be alone yet contented hundreds of miles from the nearest human being, while the same individual may feel desolate with loneliness in the middle of a large crowd of people. In this respect, loneliness differs from the symptoms of physical deprivation. Violence results from humanity's feeling of impotence. The loss of individual and personal meaning in our age ensures a corresponding violence from those who are deprived of their identities. For violence, whether spiritual or physical, is a quest for identity and the meaningful. The less identity, the more violence. It's why they have to kill in order to find out whether they are real. This is where the violence comes from. This meaningless killing around our streets is the work of people who have lost all identity and who have to kill in order to know if they are real or if the other person is real. Violence as a form of quest for identity is one thing that people who have been ripped off feel the need of. Such a person is going to show who he is, or that she's tough. So anybody on a psychic frontier tends to get tough or violent, and it's happening to us on a mass scale today. It might even be said that in a society which proceeds at the speed of light, humankind has neither goals, objectives, nor private identity. A person is an item in a databank, software only, easily forgotten, and deeply resentful. A person with humility has a confident yet modest sense of his or her own merits, but also an understanding of his or her limitations. The moment you think you have seen everything or know it all, nature senses arrogance and gives you a great big dose of humility. You must give up on the idea that you can ever become so enlightened that you have nothing left to learn. Zen masters know that even for them, learning never ends. Humility is the lesson that stings, for along with it usually comes some kind of loss or downfall. Nature likes to keep things in balance, so when an inflated ego ignores civility and patience, it introduces humility as a way to bring the ego back down to earth. Though the sting feels like a wound at the time, it really is just a poke from the higher power to keep you balanced. Some people experience so much success in life that they take it for granted, expecting things to go their way automatically. When this results in an inflated ego that ignores patience and civility, arrogance is bred, and humility has to be taught. That is what happened to Will. Extremely handsome, tan, and athletic, with penetrating eyes, Will looked and dressed like a fashion model. Things came easily to him, and he mastered everything he tried. With his charm, intelligence, and talents, his business was lively and success was a way of life. So when Will was served a lawsuit one day, he assumed that the case would work out as easily as everything else in his life, and he didn't worry about it. But it didn't, and the suit eventually led to the breakup of his company. He tried for months afterward to get a job, but no one would hire him. His finances became strained, payments fell behind, and finally bankruptcy was his only option. Will couldn't understand why his magic was no longer intact, and after 7 years of various jobs that yielded no magic, he finally faced up to the lesson of humility. When he came to see me, Will couldn't understand how so much misfortune could come to a perfect person like him. He had to learn that his talents were wonderful, but were overshadowed alongside an attitude of arrogance. He looked down upon people who didn't have his gifts, speaking to them in a patronizing manner, treating them with impatience and annoyance, judging them as worthless or stupid. Over time, Will came to understand why life had given him so many intense lessons in humility. The lessons were difficult for him at first, but with understanding, Will made sense of his situation and committed to learning his lessons, and he turned his circumstances around. Have pride in who you are and what you have accomplished. However, if you find yourself holding secret thoughts of arrogance or self-importance, remind yourself of the lesson of humility before nature does it for you. It will sting much less that way. Many teachers and schools, in an attempt to be colorblind, do not want to acknowledge cultural or racial differences. I don't see black or white, a teacher will say. I see only students. This statement assumes that to be colorblind is to be fair, impartial, and objective, because to see differences, in this line of reasoning, is to see what seems on the surface to be defects and inferiority. Although this sounds fair and honest and ethical, the opposite may actually be true. Color blindness may result in refusing to accept differences and therefore accepting the dominant culture as the norm. It may result in denying the very identity of our students, thereby making them invisible. What seems on the surface to be perfectly fair may in reality be fundamentally unfair. In the classic sense, being colorblind can mean being non-discriminatory in attitude and behavior, and in this sense, colorblindness is not a bad thing. However, too often it is used as a way to deny differences that help make us who we are. A good example was provided by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1974. The San Francisco School Department was sued on behalf of Chinese-speaking students who, parents and other advocates charged, were not being provided with an equal education. The school department, however, argued that they were indeed providing these students with an equal education because they had exactly the same teachers, instruction, and materials as all the other students. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, ruled against the school department. The dictum, "equal is not the same," is useful here. It means that treating everyone in the same way will not necessarily lead to equality. Rather, it may end up perpetuating the inequality that already exists. Learning to affirm differences rather than deny them is what a multicultural perspective is about. At a recent professional meeting, a Stanford University researcher discussed the results of a test of the effects of a drug to control aggression. The trouble is that the research was carried out on juvenile inmates in a California prison, creating a lot of legal and ethical problems. The Stanford research gave groups of juvenile inmates varying doses of an anti-aggression drug and assessed its effect on their behavior. The controversy lies in the fact that the researcher reportedly admitted setting the dose so low as to be a placebo, intentionally denying the subjects any therapeutic effect from the drug. Federal regulations allow research in prisons under only very limited conditions, when there is a prospect of direct therapeutic benefit for the subjects. This means no placebo-controlled trials are allowed. Research in prisons was not always so limited. Before the early 1980s, prisoners were considered to be a popular research population. Prisoners offered a controlled environment. No prisoners would be lost to follow-up. Prisoners were highly motivated subjects, whether to earn extra money or other forms of payment, make up for previous behavior, or get better access to medical care. In fact, a study performed in the early 1980s demonstrated that research participation was a popular and highly valued activity. The most powerful inmates were the most likely to be research subjects. But such motivation is precisely why concerned regulators moved to limit research participation by prisoners. How can subjects give truly voluntary consent in a setting where freedom is so severely constrained? In the case of the Stanford research, consent is doubly complicated by the fact that the prisoners were juveniles. The Stanford researcher has not yet commented on his motives, but he might have found inmates a desirable research population for a number of reasons. For research into ways to control aggression, whom is it better to study and who is more likely to benefit than aggressive prisoners? Deceitfully breaking the rules as he did, however, runs the risk of harming not only subjects but the future of such research altogether.